Wi-Fi is a hot topic, as you all know, in sport right now. And as venues try to keep up with the expectations of fans armed with smartphones and tablets and their increasing demand for content and a need to share their experience socially. In this session, we're going to talk about what fans really want from Wi-Fi in a sports venue, which, thanks to Vince, I can only think of as a dirty environment now. And crucially, we also want to think about what venue owners wish to achieve through the implementation of installing Wi-Fi. We've got a great panel here, and we're hoping to get an understanding from this super panel and also from the audience. We want your thoughts here. The guys yesterday were very keen to say that they want your input on this. And Vince has obviously already run over quite a lot of the overview, so hopefully he's sort of triggered some thoughts in your minds. Saying that this is pretty informal, I want to ask you all if you all think that stadium should have Wi-Fi for the fans. If you agree, put your hands in the air. Well, it's pretty much everybody. That's good for you. It also proves to me that your hands actually work and they do go in the air. So if you want to ask a question or you have a point to make at any point, give it a bit of a wave, and hopefully somebody will arrive with a microphone. I might not be able to see you. It's very bright. So to kick off, we want to look at what the key drivers for sports venues in delivering Wi-Fi to fans are within the stadia. And if we can begin with you, Vince, because you're already in the flow. From your experience within sport and outside of sport as well, why do you think venues feel the need to deliver Wi-Fi to their fans and to their customers?
Well, I think, as I said just now, it really varies. I think there's definitely this overwhelming sense that that I expect it to be always on, I expect it to always be connected, and yet I go into this black zone, this dark zone, when I go into my favourite sporting venue. I've paid a lot of money to be there, and I want to share the experience with other people, and I can't. So I think that there's a bit that there's just an acceptance that that there's an increasing expectation from fans that connectivity is there. I think what each individual club or racetrack or cricket ground or whatever wants to do with it kind of varies. So some may just want it to be for their premium customers. They might want it as a loyalty scheme, to reward their most faithful customers. Others see it as a kind of social right and want it to sort of be available for all. Sadly, often their ability to pay and those ideals are often mismatched, but it really does vary.
And moving on to you, Dan, if content is key to the fan experience, what kind of content do you think fans are going to demand?
I think they want a wide range. I think they want content that's relevant to their match day. We've been doing a lot of good stuff with ADI in terms of low latency streaming, which would allow video. We could basically go from a live match feed to a mobile device in under 3 seconds.
That's quicker than my brain can function.
So I think it's content that's relevant, that could come in all different shapes and forms of information, video, audio.
Yeah. And Xavier, you have the broadcast background, so if we can bring you in, you're essentially delivering engaging content. So how can Wi-Fi help clubs to do this within the venue?
Well, it's probably today the best infrastructure that is existing to push the content to the fans in the stadium. Is it the only infrastructure? Probably not. I think there's other technologies that are already used in a lot of stadiums. Think about IPTV, which is used a lot on the screens, or just wired connections onto the LED screens in the stadium. There's a lot of stadiums which have a few hundred screens, so you have to push content also on those screens. So it's a mix, but by mixing all these infrastructure, you can bring really compelling content to the people in the stadium. That's for sure.
Yeah. And do you think, going beyond internet access, how do you think venues can best engage the fans with the Wi-Fi? How can they do that?
Well, I think the content is really important. We always say content is king, and that's still true. And I think the content takes care of attracting people into the apps that will be used over Wi-Fi. And then in those apps, there's a number of other things that will attract. Betting, I think, is one of those which is really important. When we talk about ROI then, it's by attracting people into the apps that you will create ROI. But before creating ROI, you have to create ROE, return on emotion. And if there's no emotion, there will be no ROI. So you have to see it in that kind of a structure.
Yeah. Dan, do you think it's enough just to give fans in a stadium access to the internet on their mobiles? Is that sufficient?
I don't think so. I think if you actually ask the fans what they want, that's probably what they'd say. But I think if you can create something new for them to interact with, that they can take away with them, all those added elements, I think people would just expect to turn up to a venue, maybe be able to tweet about the match they're watching, maybe take a picture, upload it to Facebook. But then if you can add in a whole load of other stuff that I think the guys at the Cloud are doing, that starts to become very compelling and actually gives it a commercial reason to do it.
I think that's music to everybody's ears in here. Every time you mention ROI and commercial value. What, in your experience, Vince, do you think that have you found the kind of content that users consume? You mentioned about the Ashes experience. Is it general browsing? Is it video? Or is it book?
So I mean, again, it really depends, on the venue. So a lot of usage is just the obvious things that you think it would be, which is checking emails, social media, connectivity. Increasingly across the whole network, we've seen a real rise in video streaming. I think it's partly a function of the places we are. So we tend to be in places where we talk about having downtime, dwell time, where people have a little bit of time to do something. So we see massive rise in video streaming in the last year or so. I think we saw from YouTube yesterday, and we know they're a big driver of usage on the network, for example. So it's kind of all of those things, but also I mentioned before that actually it's some of these over the top things like messaging services. I mean, I think it's quite interesting. WhatsApp don't do any advertising at all, but in Mobile World there was a company that from Korea who do use the power of their messaging network to share stuff, and they actually got people to start sharing games, and they were billing $1 billion of revenue within the first year. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone here is going to do that, but if you start to get that sharing working and you're part of that network, there's a really attractive opportunity
but
there.
In the stadium, if the game's that dull, so you're not going to share games in the stadium, or would that be before or during half time? Or
Well, I think there's an interesting conversation I had someone the other day about it's this problem that parents have with teenage kids who they're trying to have a conversation and they're on their phone messaging or doing whatever it is they're doing, and the parent will go, that's just rude, and actually from the teenager's perspective, that person is equally in the room, and so actually just because someone is on their phone doing stuff during an exciting match, it's because they're sharing it with people that they think are in the room that aren't necessarily in the 30,000, 40,000 people in that stadium. So I think you do get people engaging during a game, whether it's contentious events, whether it's, I suspect there probably is a bit more browsing when it's dull. But
yeah. And referring to people literally in the room in this case, we have a few questions that we wanted to ask to people who run stadiums, who are in charge of venues. So we'll throw out questions. Maybe if you want to contribute them, please do, or at least just think about what your answer to that would be. So for following on from the panel's answers to those questions, think about the importance of social media to your club or your organisation, and how that fits with Wi-Fi. You could be working with your fans during the game, couldn't you? What should venues look to achieve in delivering the Wi-Fi? And I'm looking at you again, Xavier. Where do you feel clubs should place the greater emphasis? Is it on delivering a second screen type experience to fans within the stadium or those watching on the TV? Are there similarities, between the two experiences, and which is more important?
I think they're both important, that's for sure. The technology is the same, pretty much the same. I think the way you present your content in the stadium or at home is totally different. Typically what you will do for people at home is give them as much content as you want. We have a technology at TVS which is CCAS that gives you the ability to push multi-angle camera views of a certain action on the pitch to a device. And so people at home will want to see 10 different angles and be able to analyze what has happened even after the match and things like that. That's not the case in the stadium. In the stadium, they really want to see the most important actions and the best images, and as short as possible, because they want to follow what's happening on the pitch, and that's why they sit in the stadium. On the other hand, we need to see also there have been surveys where they have been asking to fans what they think about getting video content on their mobile devices in the stadium. And most of the people say, yes, we want that. And the reason is that about 40% of the fans in the stadium declare that, in fact, they don't see really what's happening on the pitch. It's too far away. It's on the opposite corner. I didn't understand what has happened in the match because I was not on the right side of the pitch and things like that. And that's really helping people to understand better what's happening on the pitch. So yeah, I think it's very important to push that into the stadium.
So you think it's important, even though if a club, for example, is convinced their chief exec to invest in ADI, putting the programming on a massive screen in the stadium, people still need to.
They go together. That's what I was referring to in the first question. I think it's a mix of different infrastructures and technologies, and all that together is taking care of giving a good fan experience. An augmented fan experience to the people in the stadium. It's not only Wi-Fi with multi-camera angles on a device that will get people more engaged into the game. It's everything. If you don't do the mix in a good way, things will be missing. People will not have the right fan experience, etc. And they will stay at home and sit in front of the TV.
And that's the concern for everybody.
Yeah.
Dan, if I can bring you in again, there's a debate as to whether clubs and venues should deliver content within a walled garden environment, control the content delivered to them and restrict the use of Wi-Fi. Do you think that approach is a sensible one?
I don't actually know, but I would imagine that the clubs should do their research and actually ask the fans what they want, what they use it for, because I think going blind would be risky. But take advice from people like the Cloud, people like EVS who have done this before, and work out, what is going to enrich a fan's day out at a football match and encourage them to come back again. And at the end of the day, it's all about, I guess, bums on seats for the clubs and how that can be done. So in terms of walled garden, I guess you can control that content and give them content that you think they should be consuming. But also, I think you need to be mindful of the fact that actually punters just want to do other stuff. They don't want to be forced to watch stuff. So that should be thought of as well.
Did you have a comment on that, or?
Well, I think it comes back to your commercial model. So you could envisage that if you have an exclusive betting partner and they've helped you significantly underwrite the cost of your investment, it doesn't seem unreasonable that people can't get to other betting sites. So or you might have an approach where you get 8 betting companies and you do that. So I think for some content that can kind of work. I think also if there's content available in the stadium that maybe have rights only within the stadium and can't be seen beyond, you need to be very careful about DRM, so people aren't rebroadcasting stuff from the stadium internationally, which they don't have the rights for. So I think there are some things that you would need to look at. But more broadly, when you think about social media and things, we don't really know what's going to be tomorrow's most important social media, and for different demographics, it's different things. So I think it's quite hard to just block them all. Or tell people they can only do Facebook. I don't think that really works.
Dan mentioned the football scenario, and we have kind of talked about the football, but we're not just focusing on football here. Do you, Vince, think that different sports have different needs? You touched on it in your presentation. They have different needs in connecting, and what are they really, from cricket to rugby to horse racing?
Well, I mean, cricket, is. Particularly the 5-day version of the game. It's a long event. People take newspapers and picnics. This is just an extension to that almost. So you will tend to have longer times when people are spending time browsing. You might have additional content. Radio, for example. People quite like listening to the radio commentary. So those types of things are going to be important. I think for football clubs again. I think there are different tiers of football clubs who have different objectives. So for those clubs that kind of want to be really engaged with their community, they're going to create all sorts of assets that are around that kind of community engagement with the club. For others, it's slightly different things. I think so it will vary by how long the stadium want you at the club, effectively. They want you out, whether they want you in. How they're going to kind of use the connectivity to help to drive that, and how they're going to drive their commercial agenda. Because I suspect that certain rugby clubs are more similar to what certain football clubs want to achieve.
Yeah, especially if they share stadium as well. So you think that it might be a case of almost changing the ethos of at the end of the game, get the herd out of the stadium. It's maybe keep them in there a bit longer, get them there a bit sooner. And if you install Wi-Fi, then you have to change the way you manage your crowd attending.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on the reasons why the stadium want people out there. There may be certain places that they don't want to have to deal with some of the issues, but it's really how they want to engage with the fans and keep them there longer or not.
You've touched on the betting thing. Seems to be a bit of a fixation because I suppose it's one of the most obvious ways that you can envisage the ROI. But if we can ask the panel, how can venues deliver added value to commercial partners through Wi-Fi? You've alluded to some of them. Are there other ways you can see them doing that?
Well, to take the betting in the first instance. So I talked about you could have live odds on the perimeter of things. So therefore there's some linkage that go online now and connect. So you can start to not only you can have a call to action, whereas previously you couldn't have that call to action because the call to action was when you've left here in 2 hours time, hey, why don't you use us? And that doesn't resonate quite so well. I think again, if you think about kit sponsors or other sponsors, they can start to take over. Say you use the portal, they can take over the whole look and feel of that portal. So they start to create a Nike or a Puma experience around your day out at the game, for example. Or whether it's food and beverage, you might have an exclusive partnership with a particular beverage provider. Again, you can start to talk about using those types of assets. So you're getting branding onto people's phones and reaching them with content. And again, I think the important thing to remember is you find out who these people are and you can engage with them when they're not actually in your ground. And that's being able to reach people outside of the ground means you can take that sponsorship beyond the ground. And I think that's quite important too.
Yeah, that was something that we talked about, Dan, yesterday. I think you might have had a bottle of beer in your hand. I didn't. About you were talking about how clubs can use Wi-Fi throughout the venue, and how in terms of when they're in the stadium, how they can engage with them, but also maybe. Yeah,
I guess so for clubs. If you take a step back and you think of the user journey. So when you buy your ticket, to what Vince was saying earlier, you actually can start to capture some very interesting information from the purchasers, and then take them through this journey. So on your ticket stub, it might have a code, for example, where you might download an app that then could have some exclusive content, and then it could be your journey to the ground. It could be an away match. It could be traffic information within that whole environment. You get to the ground, and then there's other offers and other experiences that you can then have. I guess, and then also from a stadium's perspective, having very resilient Wi-Fi would then allow them to have IPTV solutions, other things that perhaps they haven't had before.
But you're not mentioning the thing where you said you could probably order a beer from your seat, and which seemed the most important thing last night.
So yes, I'm sat in my seat. It's 5 minutes before half time. If in theory it's possible. In reality, it's probably a bit more tricky to implement.
Well, in the US they do it already. You can order your pizza. They bring it to your seat.
There we go.
They do that already.
This is in,
that's the other thing,
in the US.
Yeah, in the US.
We were going to move on to that and ask you about your extensive experience with that. But if you want to,
so on that, if there was and we discussed this last night, which is now coming back to me, was to actually not encourage drinking within the stadium, but to actually, we're looking at different sports and how Lords you can take a bottle of wine in. Rugby, I think you can actually still drink in the stadium. Football seems to be a big no-no, but if that could be encouraged, then in terms of crowd control and in the way that we can now report abuse by seat number, texting, all that stuff can be done. So something else to think about. But again, that would increase revenues. You've only got 90 minutes to drink whatever it is, but it might be better than having 5 pints before kick-off and same again afterwards.
Dan always drinks responsibly.
Yeah.
Your vision that you're sharing is very exciting, and the potential we all realise is huge, but even the least technical amongst us Appreciate there are large logistical obstacles to introducing Wi-Fi into stadiums in a seamless fashion. If I can start with you, Vince, because this is your bread and butter really, what are the challenges in delivering Wi-Fi on a large scale? And because you understand it's commonplace in shopping centres, and how would it be different? And
well, the biggest challenge is that people are there and everyone's got different handsets. If we just had one handset on every seat, it would be quite straightforward. But I mean, the biggest thing is really, you know, it's interesting that we tend to initially sort of move towards everyone's got connectivity, and wouldn't it be great if they can all watch streaming video, which is probably the worst thing that you want in terms of the complexity of delivery. And actually, it might be that, you know, some of that delivery stuff, actually, the video stuff might be stuff that you don't watch during the game, because hopefully the game is interesting enough. Even so, it's and the other thing is getting very clear and very real up front about what you're going to get or what you're not going to get for the money that you spend. And I think, you know, as I say, one of the things that we're, you know, most pleased with how things went with Lords was we were very clear up front, but we were a bit nervous, you know, when it went live, that someone would wander around and go, it doesn't work here. And we go, yeah, this was the map we showed you. It wasn't going to work there. But they didn't. They totally got what they were trying to achieve, and it worked perfectly for them in the places that they wanted it to work. And that's given them the confidence to kind of start, you know, the next phase. So I think it's kind of those two things. It's you know, just there are just technical difficulties, and I think Middlesbrough yesterday talked about, you know, their stadium struggling to cope with the demands of all the infrastructure that needs to go into a stadium that was only built in the 90s. Certain stadiums, it is very hard to deploy, you know, because I said you want to put your antenna exactly where you want it, just beaming on this group of people here. But if there isn't just anything physically for me to stick it on, it actually is quite difficult, and that's again quite a challenge. And it's typically why, you know, when we do work with, you know, large venues and arenas, we tend to use the local you know, contractors, so the people who work every day in, day out on cabling those stadiums and installing stuff, because they know all this stuff already. There's no point in us coming in and saying we can tell you how best to run a cable here. Being very real on what you're trying to do.
Do you think that large stadiums could cope with the volume of traffic?
So they can cope with a large volume of traffic. The problem is, from everything we've seen, you know, globally and here in the UK, in terms of, if you know, Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. You know, whatever you provide will get used. It'll get fully utilised. You know, we saw that at Lords. So it can kind of cope, but again, so it's a bit of setting that expectation up front, because in reality, you know, the Super Bowl last year, they maxed out the Wi-Fi. They put, you know, as many access points, you know, just went to town on it and making it as Wi-Fi friendly as it could be, and only 20% of people in the stadium used it. So, you know, you sometimes can kind of build all this stuff thinking everybody's going to be sitting there, you know, but some people just don't want to do that. Not everyone wants to be that guy.
Yeah. And that's a good way to bring in, Xavier, your experiences in the US.
I agree totally with what Vince is saying. First of all, the maximum uptake of the usage of Wi-Fi in a stadium I heard of is 30%. And I never heard something above that. So you have to be aware of that as a club, that not 100% of fans are going on their devices during a match. A lot of people don't want to do that.
Is that going up as
no,
time's
it's
going by?
pretty stable apparently. And then the second thing where I also agree with Vince, it's you really have to manage the expectations of your customers. We as suppliers of technology. Typically, to give you an idea, for the World Cup, for example, we're going to, EVS is going to do all the Ccast worldwide for, I think it's a 40 broadcast, there's 100 million users or something like that. And so people will be able at home to see all the different angles of matches and things like that. This is today not going to happen in a stadium because of the technology. The infrastructure is not strong enough to do on a person-by-person basis streaming and interaction. What you can do in a stadium is push content to the devices so that you get a kind of interaction, but it's not the same. Or you can do different things, like Barclays Center, for example, in the US is doing that. They create not video clips that they send to the devices so people can choose which clip they want to see. What they do is they create like little playlists, looped playlists with a number of clips in that they refresh as the game goes further. And people know that the clip list is 2 minutes long and not longer than that. And when you look 2 minutes on your device, you've seen the most important elements of the match or the first time or things like that. So you have to adapt. But if you're honest with your customer about that, and customers know what they can expect and what they can't expect, then you can start building the apps around that and make a good customer experience. And sometimes when I hear about certain implementations, I have the impression that people overpromised, and then you get a bad experience, because then people say, well, it's not what we expected, and it's not doing what it should have been doing, blah blah blah, and that's a negative for the whole technology and for what we do, the three of us, I think. So.
Dan, what do you think the future holds for Wi-Fi in stadia?
I think we're at certainly in the UK anyway, this beginning of the mass adoption is already there from people with mobiles. People do get frustrated when they go somewhere and they can't get on they can't get connected.
Or even send a text in some stadia at the moment.
Yeah.
I've heard the term Faraday Cages mentioned at football grounds.
Yeah, so I see it as, you know, the parties have to increase their dialogue together, and it's led, I think, you know, with the stadiums, if they can be given if it's proof of concepts, or if it's you know, if they can see quickly the commercial value of doing that. It's just finding the right partners, really. You know, you've got the stadiums, we know you've got the footfall. If it's increasing footfall, that's one objective. But then you need to have the tech providers as well there to help.
Vince, the tech man, what does the future hold in terms of the technology?
This is where I need Sammy. So, sort of, the biggest problem is we are just going to have a lot more connected devices. So apparently within 3 years we'll all be carrying 7 connected devices, and we'll be monitoring our heart rates and all sorts of things. I even saw a connected toothbrush at Mobile World. It tracks which tooth you brushed every day. So, you know, you're going to have increasing these wearables, increasing number of devices, all trying to use limited spectrum. So whether it's unlicensed Wi-Fi spectrum, whether it's LTE cellular spectrum, actually there is just this huge crunch, and it's kind of coming. And so actually some of the things we're going to have to do is learn how to not use the Wi-Fi or not use cellular for the things that you don't need it to. So if we're just trying to connect and share something here, it's a disaster to use that Wi-Fi, because it's really valuable spectrum. You know, we should be using something up in 60 gigahertz or something just because it doesn't need to. And that's where this is all kind of heading. How you're going to get all those different types of spectrum kind of working together. So the technology will improve in terms of the seamless connectivity, the intelligence in the device to know which connection is the right one to be using, so it knows that there's a good signal, so I'll connect, or I'll switch to this or whatever. So there's all that kind of intelligence coming. But again, you've got all these different handset manufacturers. You know, the guys in Cupertino give you 3 months notice when they change something. So iOS 7 came out, we had to totally change our whole network to cope with what that was doing. So it's going to be more of the same, but it's just going to be a lot more complicated and more messy stadiums.
Okay. So to open it up, we have a question at the back, please. We have another one here.
Hi, thanks. Shane from IMG. Bit of an infrastructure question here. We're encouraging everybody to use their smartphones, their connected devices in a stadia. All right, for a football match, it's a relatively short period of time. At a cricket match, it's all day. At the racing, could be all day. Do you feel there might be a point in time where the stadia themselves start to feel an obligation to provide charging points? And does that provide a revenue stream, or rather a massive uncomfortable obligation to supply power to everybody?
I think power is the massive elephant in the room actually that no one talks about, because actually if you do go out, maybe you don't, you go to the pub before the game, you're there during the game, you then go out in the evening, your phone is going to die. The chip manufacturers again are talking about all these advances they're going to make in how your phone can do more things cooler. But the one thing that they said was, even though we're going to make all of these changes, the one thing we can't improve is battery life. So I think you're absolutely right that we're going to need to find ways to get power on the move, and it could be an opportunity. But again, you've got sort of wireless charging and things like that coming down the track. I'm always a little bit nervous about those types of technologies, but let's get powered up. But power is going to be a big problem, which I think needs solving.
Hi, it's Simon Benoit from Opta. I was wondering if you can see a situation where targeted use of Wi-Fi in certain areas would be used to introduce premium ticketing. So somewhere in between standard ticketing and hospitality, people would pay more to sit in an area that's connected.
Is there anybody here wants that? Is there anybody in the room who could answer that question? No.
I think for hospitality, probably a lot of clubs are thinking about first roll out that kind of services to the hospitality suites, and then in a later stage go more wider. If you plan to do so, then you have to see that also your applications are really adapted to the hospitality suites. What I mean by that is, when I have an hospitality suite, I'm paying a lot of money for the hospitality suites, and my customers that I invite come to the hospitality suite. Then I think the form the app is taking needs to be adapted to the hospitality suite in which I am. So it needs to be branded with my brand in my hospitality suite. And do they want to pay for that? Maybe a little bit, but I don't think too much, because they pay already a lot of money for the hospitality suites. On the other hand, it's an added value that you as a club give to your customers that pay a lot for your hospitality suites. So it's
be expected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think you know, in terms of premium seats within the bowl, you know, in the good old days when there were four square sides, and you go, well, that's just that stand, and it's standalone, and that's where all the premium people will go. It was probably more doable. I think, even though I've talked about a very directed and targeted antenna, it's actually quite difficult within a sort of bowl environment to just you know, go, right, just these seats will have connectivity. There'll inevitably be some leakage. So it's quite hard to achieve, and also you're kind of going to gate your seats potentially by, you know, this Wi-Fi access. So it's doable, but it's in a bowl environment, it starts to be quite hard to have just little sections where Wi-Fi is available.
Can we squeeze one last question in? Apologies that it's slightly overrunning. I think if you approach these lovely gentlemen afterwards, they will be happy to chat with you. Have that last question.
Hi, I'm Kerry from Celtic, and we actually have full stadium Wi-Fi at Celtic Park. We also have a live matchday companion app. I think after the Bernabeu, we're the only other European stadium. I've gone through all the things that you guys have talked about this year. We've had it running all season. Just if anybody wants to ask specific from a club or point of view, I'm happy to speak about it at lunchtime, because I am...
Should have been sat here.
No, I don't want to get up there, but I have lived and breathed the project all year, and we've had huge success with our Wi-Fi, and it's never fallen over, and we regularly have full houses of 60,000. So
that's a brilliant point.
Yeah, we also have some commercial partners on board, so I'm happy to talk about the kind of ROI that we are seeing through it as well.
So there's your lady in the audience there as well. Sorry that it's just slightly overrun, and to thank the panel, to Vince, to Dan, and to Xavier, and thank you.